Did the United States take out the Nord Stream pipelines? Don't know. A lot of questions about that. This guy, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, seems to think so. He says everybody knows it. Everybody says it. Everybody I talk to all over the world say it's a foregone conclusion. It's the most obvious thing ever. And it's very interesting in context because we have the United States Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, who calls it a tremendous opportunity to finally get off of Russian oil. So big questions about this. We will, of course, also check in with the former CIA director, John Brennan, see what he has to say about this. But first, I want to share with you this very interesting Twitter thread that I highly recommend that you follow. This guy, his name is @Sander_2021. Make sure you give him a follow. On Twitter, this is what he is talking about. He published this tweet back on September 30th, 4:58 p.m. And he walks us through this story. He tells us, breaking, a Boeing P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol in a reconnaissance aircraft was the only military aircraft spotted above the Nord Stream pipeline at the time of the detonations. This kind of aircraft is armed with torpedoes itself, and it can communicate with submarines. Says that they have sono buoys that allow them to communicate with the submarines. And here, this he calls a U.S. Boeing, saying that this is something that was from the United States.
KC-135.
When we pull this up, you can see that there is actual radar assembly in a 3D space that takes place in this image. And he walks us through this, where there is actually an airplane that he's monitoring come in and circle around the Nord Stream pipeline before apparently it drops some sort of explosive down and blows them up. Let's listen in as he walks us through this a little bit.
This KC-135 comes in and it goes into the air refueling together, right? That marshalling pattern. So now they're flying around. They're doing an air refuel hookup. This guy's getting some juice. So now they've got fuel, and you can see his directional heading is about to start changing, and he's going to bug out, and he's going to hook a right, and they separate. And so the air refueler starts to bug back to its home base, and then this thing comes in over the Nord Stream and starts to descend in altitude down to about 10,800 feet, and there it is doing a little loop, and then it starts to do some little jiggy line stuff. But in so
here he sees,
and he's going to bug.
This is the scene after the refueling where the aircraft is now going to descend down and then make contact after it is ready to drop off the payload.
Out, and he's going to hook a right, and they separate. And so the air refueler starts to bug back to its home base, and then this thing comes in over the Nord Stream and starts to descend in altitude down to about 10,800 feet, and there it is doing a little loop. And then it starts to do some little jiggy line stuff. But in the window.
Pretty interesting. So they're following this aircraft. Now here on this scene, you can see that the call sign for the aircraft is not available. It says NA, and then all of the signs are just the @ sign, at. The call sign has been entirely blanked out. And so if you want to go watch the rest of that video, I encourage you to go follow @Sander2021. But he walks us through this. He says, look, this is a masked identity airplane. It's a rolling hex code. It's got a specific identity. He says it's from the U.S. military, Boeing P-8 Poseidon. Not sure what it is, but he says it is U.S. equipment. He says it carries a lightweight torpedo, operational range 10,000 yards, so it can just fly over, drop off the payload, and scoot on out of there. It carries air transportable communications with buoys. It can take out submarines, saying it could have been used as a solo mission in this attack, essentially, on the pipeline. It says, for those in doubt, we've covered many different clips. Joe Biden has said previously that Nord Stream 2 is going away. We also know that Victoria Nuland has said that Nord Stream 2 is going away. They wanted it gone, and now it's gone. Many people are asking, who did it? Antony Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State, made a very interesting statement over the weekend. He came out and said that the explosions that take out the Russian supply of fuel to Europe provide a tremendous opportunity. Now that the Nord Streams are gone, things are looking up. Here's Antony.
First, it's important to make clear that these pipelines, that is Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2, We're not pumping gas into Europe at this time. Nord Stream 2 never became operational, as is well known. Nord Stream 1 has been shut down for weeks because of Russia's weaponization of energy.
Did you hear that little line? The weaponization of energy, which is very interesting because they were all doing cartwheels when they were sanctioning Russia all over the place. Remember that? Oh, they're not going to have McDonald's over there. They're not going to have anything. Spotify's canceling. Everybody's pulling out all over the place. And so when Russia decides to use their levels of power back towards the West, they now say it's the weaponization of energy. So was what they did the weaponization of McNuggets? I don't know, but that's what war is. War is the leverage from one country exerted on another country. But now their language is changing. If they do it, it's called sanctions on the side of righteousness. If Russia does it, it's now the weaponization of energy. I guess that justifies them in bombing pipelines?
Because of Russia's weaponization of energy. What we've been doing, and we've also been working on this together for many, many weeks, as we saw the Russian aggression in Ukraine and as we saw the ongoing weaponization of energy by Russia, is to work very closely with European partners as well as countries around the world to make sure that there is enough energy on world markets. And so we've significantly increased our production as well as making available to Europe liquefied natural gas. And we're now the leading supplier of LNG to Europe to help compensate for any gas or oil that it's losing as a result of Russia's aggression.
So the U.S. is now sending more gas over to Europe. So a competing pipeline from the Russians would really interfere with that delivery, with that supply, right?
Against Ukraine. We've worked to release oil from our strategic petroleum reserve to make sure as well that there was oil on the markets and to help keep prices down. We've engaged with the European Union and established months ago a task force to work directly with Europe on ways to decrease demand to help get through the winter, as well as to pursue additional supply and to find ways to speed up the transition to renewables, even as we're getting through this challenging period. So all of that work is ongoing.
Yeah.
My own sense, and I mentioned this the other day, is, look, there's a lot of hard work to do to make sure that countries and partners get through the winter. Europe itself has taken very significant steps to both decrease demand, but also look at ways to pursue the transition to renewables at the same time.
And neither one of those is going to work.
Ultimately, this is also a tremendous opportunity.
Oh.
It's a tremendous opportunity to once and for all remove the dependence on Russian energy.
There it is.
And thus to take away from Vladimir Putin the weaponization of energy as a means of advancing his imperial designs.
There it is. We speculated last week that one way to really box Russia in would be to take out any possibility of a negotiated settlement. The last thing that the West wants is Europe to get weak in the knees, to get a little bit squirrely when push comes to shove. We're about to hit the winter season, and if they can't heat their homes, right, they're already having a difficult time figuring out the supply chain for a winter. We're seeing pictures all over Twitter of protests breaking out over Europe, people shutting off the lights in their businesses because they can't afford to keep the power on. You look at the charts, electricity, natural gas, everything is spiking up to the moon in a way that's insane. And so what might stop that momentum, that really negative shift? Well, if Russia just turned on the gas, they have these two big pipelines called Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2. What happens if, like, the Germans, for example, decided, we can't take any more of this stuff. All right, sorry, Ukraine. We need to heat the homes of our own people, and we're going to flip the switch, turn the gas on. What would happen? Well, the coalition in Europe would break apart. NATO would break apart. The whole order would now start to crumble. So how do you make sure that there is no pressure relief valve? How do you eliminate the possibility of a negotiated settlement with the Russians? Blow up the pipelines. Make sure there are no pipelines. Russia, guess what? You're out of the game. You don't even get the opportunity to turn them on. The U.S. has taken them out to ensure that the Democrats have a continual supply of oil leaving the United States going to European allies. The same party that was screaming no war for oil all throughout the Bush administration, crying from the rooftops, are now laying the foundation for World War III for oil, calling it a tremendous opportunity now. We can now provide all the fuel. How many billions of dollars in contracts are now being executed for that little change? Even though it might cost a world war, hopefully it's worth it for these insane lunatics. Here is Blinken.
That's very significant, and that offers tremendous strategic opportunity for the years to come. But meanwhile, we're determined to do
a lot of money,
everything we possibly can to make sure that the consequences of all of this are not borne by citizens in our countries, or for that matter, around the world.
Not borne by citizens in our countries? Is this person nuts? We're spending tens of billions of dollars over there. And, unless this thing has an off-ramp, which it seems like they are trying to remove at every turn, there may be some seriously increased consequences in the future. Now, with that backdrop, we're going to check in with this guy, Professor Jeffrey Sachs. Jeffrey Sachs was on with Bloomberg, and he laid out a position that, they were not happy with. This is a professor telling Bloomberg that maybe the U.S. is behind the Nord Stream explosions, and the press is not happy about this. Whoa, wait a minute there, buddy. You can't just say stuff like that on the show. Don't you know our bosses and overlords will be unhappy with that?
Now, to make it definitive, the destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline, which I would bet was a U.S. action, perhaps U.S. and Poland. This is
Jeff,
speculation.
we got to stop there. That's quite a statement as well. Why do you feel that was a U.S. action? What evidence do you have of that?
Well, first of all, there's direct radar evidence that U.S. helicopters, military helicopters that are normally based in Gdansk, were circling over this area. We also had the threats from the United States earlier in this year that one way or another, we are going to end Nord Stream.
Biden
we
also
have a remarkable statement by Secretary Blinken last Friday in a press conference. He says, this is also a tremendous opportunity. It's a strange way to, it's a strange way to talk.
Yeah.
If you're worried about the piracy on international infrastructure of vital significance. So I know this runs counter to our narrative. You're not allowed to say these things in the West. But the fact of the matter is, all over the world, when I talk to people, they think the U.S. did it. Just to tell you. And by the way, even reporters on our papers that are involved tell me privately, of course, but it doesn't show up in our media.
Professor, I don't want to get into tit for tat about what did or did not happen with Nord Stream, because I don't have the evidence, and we don't have a counterbalance to this.
We don't have a counterbalance, she says. You're making a whole lot of sense here, and I don't really know what to say, so we're just going to go ahead and move on to the topic. Thank you, Professor, for getting out there and making all of our heart pressure explodes. All right, so that's Jeffrey Sachs. Now, of course, saying what everybody thinks is obvious, that feels like there's only one party that has a lot of interest in this whole thing. And here is John Brennan. We got to listen to John Brennan. This guy's something else. All right, let's pull him up. The former CIA director, John Brennan, he's blaming the Russians for the Nord Stream 2 pipelines, which means it's probably anybody but the Russians. Here is Brennan.
People saying that this should be basically Russian territory. Do you
field setbacks are coming one after the other? There is domestic opposition to this partial mobilization. So I think they're going to see some additional saber rattling, and also trying to consolidate their hold on the portion of Ukraine that they do occupy.
You're seeing this mass exodus of fighting age men from Russia, opinion.
As these young Russian men are trying to flee the country, it's clear that a large part of the Russian population is not supportive of this military conflict. And secondly, these young Russians know that they will just be sent to slaughter in Ukraine. The Ukrainian forces have done exceedingly well as far as being able to withstand the Russian onslaught. And the number of Russian soldiers killed in the tens of thousands I think is clearly sending a chill inside of Russia right now. So I think we're going to see more of this. The question is, what will be the breaking point, and what can Putin do to try to reverse what clearly is a very, very bad trajectory for him?
Do you think he's stable?
So I think we're seeing increasingly desperate steps that are being taken. And if these explosions in the
here it is,
undersea gas pipelines off the Danish coast are acts of sabotage, I think we're going to see more and more things that Putin is going to try to do to try to weaken the resolve of the NATO countries, but also to try to intimidate anybody who might oppose it.
Do you think Russia's behind the sabotage of the pipelines?
Well, I think all the signs point to some type of sabotage. These pipelines are only in about 200 feet or so of water, and Russia does have an undersea capability that would easily lay explosive devices by those pipelines. And I do think it's a signal to Europe that Russia can reach beyond Ukraine's borders. So who knows what he might be planning next? But
Russia can reach beyond Ukraine's borders by blowing up their own pipelines. Amazing conclusion there from the former CIA director, a person who apparently has a lot of intelligence, but not enough to sign a document that endorsed a position on Hunter Biden that turned out to be entirely erroneous. CIA Director John Brennan doesn't have much intelligence at all. Now, that is, my friends, the update on the Nord Stream pipeline. A lot of people making some very weird statements. Antony Blinken, one of them, calling it a tremendous opportunity. It's like if Coke woke up and said, you know, we're looking into the explosion at the Pepsi plant that exploded, but it's a tremendous opportunity, you know, something like that. Maybe that's not right, but you get the picture. Weird to say that in the same sentence as he's saying that the U.S. is now the big provider of fuel. Very strange. So I guess it's their war for oil. I don't want to be a part of it, but many people in the left do. John Brennan out there blaming the Russians, which means it's probably not the Russians. And of course, we'll continue to follow. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for liking this video before you get on over to the next video on this channel. And I appreciate you being here.